Next phase of human evolution. Such a title. But I'm serious. And after going through so many videos and posting all the subjects such as being the now, Chantu or Taoism, Zen, Buddhism, Christianity, middle way, about awakening and be with the source of who we are, the law of the universe that prevails everywhere, including within us, and connected to the source. I use the word the heart, and then one of the book I mentioned about use the brain, listen to your heart, and live with your mission. It comes down to that specific topic. How do we use the brain and listen to the heart and live with the mission? Shila Samadhi Panya, right conduct, Samadhi, calm and quiet mind, and Panya, insight, wisdom, is one way to connect to that thought, or plan, do, check, act, or starting with check, act, plan, do. Using the mind would orient us by learning from what happened in the past, not making the same mistake, and come up with a plan, wisdom and insight, so that we can keep evolving. Our mission as human is to live well and keep moving forward. That's what I see. And the discussion so far brought us to this critical point. To say it simply, we have the brain and it has the input and process and output. Down deep at the core, when we don't use the brain or mind, so emptying mind, calm and quiet, samadhi state into the zone, what happens is that we can be awakened to see how our being is manifestation of the laws of the universe. You can call it the way of God, if you prefer that term. God being infinite intelligence, wisdom, compassion, let's say. So that we have the source, and instead of simply living in the mind or the brain, added later with the use of the words and the logic, cause and effect relationship, that has created the gap to where we are from. I use the word two universes. The mind is one universe, it has its limitation, and there's another process functioning, which is a core of who we are, original self, where the creative source of the universe is functioning. Otherwise, we cannot live. So mind is just a tool to live better, but how we use the mind, if we don't know how to use it, then we get into the confusion and delusion and suffering because we are off from the base, the source, the intelligence of the universe that's functioning within us. That's the state of being in the now that we can access. That's the awakening. So the first step, if I may say so, is to realize the limitation of the mind. Mind creates suffering. You may have some pleasure, but you are confined in there. And if you hit your head many times on the wall, you start to realize what's going on, and then you start to go deeper into your consciousness, and you may be awakened or find that there's unknown force functioning with us. That's the realization of that being, the state of being. It is as if you connect to the God, if I use such a term, awakening. But that awakening may not last long because there are two universes still. The brain's functioning, the mind functioning, but the source is processing all the things necessary in our body to make us alive and try to connect to the mind and brain, but brain has its own structure and the process. Also thinking there's a free will to do anything they want. But if you realize deeply, the free will is conditioned by the way how we are structured, and therefore the habitual patterns and the law of the universe, if we violate that, the free will is not the free will, it's a constrained will. So the notion of know thyself and connecting to thy will be done, the will of the universe, that connection has to be there. That's the evolutionary process into the future. So those two universes I mentioned, the mind or brain universe on one end and the source, the fundamental process of how the universe is functioning within us through our body and all of our existence, has to have an alignment and connection. And if we don't have the connection, we go back and forth. And you can call it the middle way or pendulum, sometimes into the brain, sometimes into the heart. So that's the second step from not just living in the mind, but being able to access to the source. But that back and forth movement, it's like a shifting the gear, and we may be able to assess how we are doing by having that notion I mentioned, the waku-waku, sense of aliveness. Because if we are in suffering, caught up in the brain or the mind, that aliveness fade away. But if we connect to the source of our being, you become one with that. And that's a zone experience of realizing that there's just fascinating life energy prevailing throughout our whole body. So I use the word transparency. Instead of being blocked, we open up. And that's the awakening. And that awakening state has to find a way of alignment with the brain. That's the third. First is limiting in the mind. The second is connecting, find a connection to the state of being, living in the now. But you lose it, therefore you go back to the delusional state, back and forth. And the third state then is having the alignment and live with that. So how to do that is a big challenge for us. And that is where I see myself. In other words, I live in my mind, do my best, but I can also access to the source and I'll be in the zone experience, blissful sense, peace, feeling eternity or transparency within myself. But then go back to living in the world and in the society using the mind. And there's confusion and finding the path, communication, and all of that. So one may say, just living in the now. And I'm so intrigued with it, and I have spent time 3-4 months, even more, not doing much in the brain. It's a funny state, but it's kind of like a monk life. And yet I feel obliged to be connected to the world. And that's the notion of the Bodhisattva, that you may be enlightened and live in that space, but come back to the world. The point is that because of the change happening with the technology and so forth, I see a feasibility for the human to bridge the gap. It may be very difficult, but I think it's worthwhile to try it. If we don't, there is a separation of those who will be going into the now and living in peace, basically pretty much off from the society's activity, self-sufficient, blissful life. In the meantime, there may be large amount of people using the brain and the mind, figuring out what to do. It may cause various suffering along the way, even to the detriment of the people's future in terms of climate change. Or if we don't deal with the technology, the advancement of it, and make a wrong decision, that's not smart. We need a wisdom. So there is a need to not just jump into the state of now, being at the source and feeling blissful, but connecting to the world. And that gap has to be bridged. That's my pretty much a conviction. Although every now and then I feel like giving up because it's not so easy to communicate, especially when we are busy or not interested in the connection to the source. So what's the point of doing it? The point of doing it is that I can see, because I've used my mind and get confused, and then I can clarify all of that, most of it at least, delusion, into the state of being, living in the now. But I'm drawn back to the society because there's a need. So spiritual leaders may help bridge the gap. But there's a strong need of others, not necessarily being a spiritual leading kind of a function, but by connecting to use the brain and show some example how we can do it. Because spiritual leaders tend to be more emphasizing on the awakening, but not go any further than that. Okay, the Bodhisattva's vow is to help people. People suffer, therefore I suffer. That's the notion. I can see us trying harder, because without bridging the gap, the future of the human may be very dismal. So let me just finish here. To summarize, I mentioned there are two universes, as I mentioned elsewhere, the universe of the mind and the universe of elsewhere, where all the laws of the universe is functioning. And if you connect to that by being in the state of now, you get awakened and you may find peace and more, blissful sensation and happiness, if you call that. But having gone there, we may also come back to the world and find a way to bridge. And there's a strong need to bridge the gap. Not just talking about the direction toward the source, but being able to come back to the world. And without that alignment, we may see a big hurdle in terms of how we may evolve into the future. I tend to think that technology may help as an idea, because over thousands of years, we came from starving and cold or too hot place to manage our life better, eating food much more easily and developing tools and so forth. So there's huge amount of benefit we gain. And if we keep going through this process without making mistake, then we get to the level where we can be more awakened, being in the state of now, connecting to the source. And when more population of people get there, it will be the point where the bridge the gap for the rest of the people can be made much more easily.